Hey viewers, my name's Kara. This video, I feel like I'm on my millionth attempt at recording it, but I'm not giving up on it because it's an important topic. I've just had to take some time in between attempts to get things together and try to make it a better video for you. I'm already talking beautifully, so this is a great start. This video is sort of a video response to Thorn Mooney's video, Good Vibes Only, which has a subtitle. I keep forgetting to look up the one word I keep forgetting, but it's being critical in a community, movement, I forget the word here, that requires positivity. So Thorn did a video talking about criticism and being critical as opposed to simply being negative, and this idea that people have taken the good vibes only idea, which was basically like, don't be so negative, don't be so hard on yourself, like don't wallow in just negative energy and like, you know, think positively, stuff like that. People have taken that to an even further extent and started saying, we can never say anything negative, or we can never talk about anything negative, or that is perceived as negative, or that talking about it is perceived as negative. I know that sounded a little bit convoluted, but I will explain more as I go on. Before I even get started in this, I just want to mention that I will be vaguely mentioning topics such as struggling with mental health, anxiety and depression, stuff like that. I don't intend to go into any detail, but just to let people know, I will be mentioning serious topics such as racism, sexism, stuff like that, but I'm not going to be talking about them in depth. And so this is the kind of one of the differences that I think exists is like, when do we need a content warning and when don't we? Like when we're just going to be talking about the general existence of things versus going really into detail. I think if we're just generally talking about them, it's not as big of a deal, but I know for some people it may be, so I just wanted to point that out. And this is kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about people using the good vibes only idea to tell us that we can't talk about serious issues like this because it's perceived as perpetuating negativity. And that's a problem. So this is sort of a video response, as I said, although I'm not going to be responding to each and everything that Thorn said in her video. I have a little list here that it's actually all already checked off because I've already tried recording this video with this list, but we're doing it again, so I'm going to be circling them instead and try to hit all my points, not go too far off the rails and into tangents and stuff, but we'll see if there's any time for storytelling. So the first thing, obviously, go watch Thorn's video if you haven't. I will put it in the end screen of this video as well as in the description, so please go check that out. A lot of the stuff that I am bringing up in this video, Thorn already talked about. So we can think of this as sort of a continuation of the conversation. So the first thing I want to talk about, diving right in at the 4-minute mark, is criticism versus negativity. Now, I admit that there is still quite a bit of negative connotation of just the word criticism or critical. When people say we're being critical, we often think of that as meaning they're being negative. We think of these things as synonymous. We think of like just saying mean, horrible things as being critical. So we might be better served for this conversation by remembering that there is a larger term that you may have heard. It's called constructive criticism. And that is the process of being critical of something or giving a criticism of something with the intention of building that thing up and improving it and making it better. So that's the constructive part. Destructive criticism is not really a term that we use as often, but that's what we would think about as being negative. It's destructive. You're trying to tear the thing down or tear the person down. You're not actually trying to help them improve at all, or there's no real like positive intention behind it at all. You're just tearing it down. So to me, this is the difference between like being negative, or when we talk about negative self-talk, this is stuff like getting up in the morning and looking at yourself in the mirror and just being like, wow, you look ugly today. Wow, I'm so horrible. Wow, I can't do anything. I'm so bad at this. I'm a failure. Whatever. That's being negative. And I apologize if me even saying that just upset people. But we have to talk about these things, right? This is the whole point. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about being negative or like perpetuating negative energy, that's like being negative for no reason, or just like being mean or name calling for no reason. So we're talking about the things I just said, or we might be talking about like, oh, I hate this person, period, point blank. Like, well, why? Like, what is it about them that you don't like? I just don't like them. I just think they're horrible. I just think they're a bad person, whatever. Like, that's just negative. That's not helpful. Constructive criticism, or being critical with a positive outcome, should be things like looking at what is currently being done wrong and how we can improve it and make it better. This would be things like Thorn's been doing, actually, with her Instagram series of mini book reviews, talking about a few good points about a book and a few points for improvement, or you might say negative points about a book. So we can be critical of things like books, movies, videos, etc., without being just negative for no reason, So like when I was in undergrad getting my degree in theater, we were taught that there are forms of feedback that are unhelpful that are both positive or negative. So like in my department, there was this running joke that like if you went to see a show and somebody was like, what did you think? And all you could really say is, it was good. I liked it. Cool. Like that was positive, but it didn't actually say anything about the thing. It didn't give any real feedback. It doesn't tell the director what they did well. It doesn't tell the actors what they did well. It doesn't tell the lighting designers or costume designers. It doesn't tell you anything. It just says, I liked it. It was good. I liked it. It also implies that because we like something, it is inherently good, which is not always the case. Similarly, you could just be negative and just say, oh, it was bad. I hated it. Again, doesn't really tell us anything, isn't really helpful. That's just being negative without giving us anything to work with, So as someone who has been on the receiving end of feedback in that type of situation, like we always had, you might think of it as a debrief. We always had what we called a post-mortem after a show, where everybody who designed or worked on the show would get together and people would be able to ask questions and say, well, what was your intention with directing it in this way or doing it this way? Or like for the actors, what did you think about this? Whatever. And we talked about these things. And that is something that could be called, could be considered related to critical thinking, like just assuming that after we've done a show, even if we think it went really well, just assuming that nothing is perfect and always wanting to talk about what can we improve. So when I think about criticism versus being negative, or even just feedback in general, I think of that lesson that I learned. It was good, I liked it, or it was bad, I hated it, are positive and negative, respectively, but neither one is very helpful. Neither one is really helpful feedback. And again, we assume that because we like something, that makes it good. Or we assume that because we disliked something, that makes it bad. but that's not always the case. There are a lot of bad films, for example, that people love. And we love them even because they're bad films, right? Like, I'm sure you can think of some examples. Similarly, there are some wonderful films that, like, if you've ever done any sort of film study, or if you have your degree in it even, let us know if you have that perspective. But there are some great films that are considered, like, you know, really great examples of movements and, like, design and, like, really influential throughout the history of film that people don't like to watch. So again, just this keeping in mind that we kind of assume if we like it, it's good, and that's not necessarily the case, but also just saying that isn't helpful. So what Thorn's been doing in her little mini book reviews, and what I also try to do when I ever do talk about stuff like that, is talk about some good things, but concrete things, like things that we actually like about them. Here's why I like it. And the things that we don't like, why we don't like them, and why we think that it's not helpful, why we think that something is a bad resource, for example. Like, not just saying, oh, it's bad, it's horrible, I hate it, the author sucks, you know, whatever, but like really talking about why. What is it about the thing? So that sort of skipped ahead to this. I guess my notes weren't the best organized, because every time I tried to talk about this, I've always skipped ahead to this topic. So I guess this is a better flow. So again, being self-critical, revising my notes, criticism of content or brands. We can be critical of books, movies, videos, as I said. We could even be critical of things like classes or workshops. If you've ever been part of a class or a workshop, or even like a talk, if you've gone to a talk at any point, a lecture, a speech, any sort of thing like that, where there has been a feedback form at the end so that you can fill out a little questionnaire letting the person know how they did, what you liked, what you didn't like. We had that for every class I took in college, so we all had the opportunity to say if there were things that we really liked that our teachers did, or things that we really didn't like that our teachers did, or things that they didn't do. And the intention was not just to tear them down and make them feel like a horrible person. The intention was to point out shortcomings that they could then use to improve. So we can be constructively critical of other people. Also, we can be self-critical in a constructive way. I think I am very self-critical. And when I say that, I don't mean the negative self-talk that I gave the example of earlier. I don't mean just simply being like, oh, well, you suck. Like, you're not perfect. You're horrible at everything. You know, whatever. Like, that's not what I mean. When I say I'm self-critical, I mean things like constructive criticism. Like, I have a tendency when anybody says anything negative about me, like just being negative, whenever somebody calls me a name, accuses me of something, whatever, I try to investigate that. And I think, you know, my initial response or thought might be, well, I'm pretty sure they're wrong. I don't think that I deserve that. However, I'm going to do a little self-examination and see, like, is there anything I've done to have warranted being called this, or to have someone say this about my work? Like, did I do something to deserve this? Did I do this? And if it turns out, no, I haven't, then cool. Then I know they were just being negative and it was kind of unfounded. If it turns out there was something that I did, then I try to correct it and I do better. But it also helps if in the first place, instead of just being negative, instead of just doing the, it's bad, I hate it, or like, you're horrible, I hate you, essentially, or like calling me names kind of thing, if instead of doing that, people said, I have this problem with the thing that you did, then that already tells me what their issue was and I can investigate that directly, instead of having to sit there and go, well, why do they hate me? Like, so that's a waste of my time, right? If somebody just says they hate me, I'm like, all right, cool. Like, that's on you, I guess. There's nothing I can do with that. But if you tell me you think there's a problem with something I've said before, that's something I can examine and do something about. Which is something that I've been getting recently. I've started having people talk to me about videos that I've posted years and years ago in which I said something that now, in 2019 or even in 2018, like years later, years after posting the video, I don't think the same things about those topics anymore. And often I haven't watched those videos since they were posted, so I forget what I've said. And someone might find a video somewhere, maybe it shows up in their suggested, maybe they're watching an old playlist of mine, you know, something, and they find an old video, they don't realize it's an old video at the time, and they just hear me say something that's kind of shocking or like that they don't like. Some people would just take that and be like, wow, I hate her, she's stupid, and never watch a video again. Other people have reached out to me and said like, hey, what do you think about such and such topic? And then I tell them and they're like, oh, okay, good. I'm glad I asked because I watched this video of yours from like 8 years ago and you definitely did not think that. And I felt like we really thought differently. And now I see that your opinions have changed over the years. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Thanks for pointing out to me that I still have a video on my channel that exists that says that thing. Because I want to know how to address it. And so now, like, I'm in a place actually currently being kind of self-critical about that kind of thing, trying to figure out what's the best course of action. Because I know a lot of people really value seeing the progress of all of us who have been on YouTube forever, like seeing the progress of our path and our practice and our beliefs and our thoughts about these topics over years. And so I know people like having the ability to go back and watch the progress. But at the same time, not everybody is seeing the date of the videos that they're watching. So not everybody knows that it's an old video and that I have different views now. So just trying to think about, like, other than I've always encouraged people to look at the dates of the videos that you're watching, at least if they say something like that you're kind of questioning, before you attack someone because of it, check out the date. And if it was a while ago, just try to check in more recently and see if they still have that viewpoint before you attack them. Or, you know, before you criticize them constructively. Or if they have changed, like, allow for that, you know, like, we should all hopefully be changing our views over time. And so I'm glad that the times that people have pointed things out like that to me, that I have changed my views on them and I don't still have the negative views or the problematic views. There's just like things that we didn't know about as much then, or that I didn't know about personally and that weren't as much talked about in the wider community back then. But yeah, so just like allowing for the fact that if we're all kind of doing what I think spirituality is meant to do and improving ourselves and through ourselves improving the world, then we will have changed our views over time. And so, yeah, I just don't know, like, what's the best way to go about that? Like, do I take those videos down because they have potentially harmful views and people aren't noticing that they're old? Do I just put a note in the description? Because I've done that for some videos, but not everybody reads the descriptions of videos. So what I'm actually thinking about doing is making a little introductory clip that would just be the introduction to all my playlists, because someone recently told me that they were watching playlists and just letting them play through, and that's why they didn't notice what the date was and they weren't reading the descriptions of the videos and stuff like that. Sorry, I'm shaking the camera a little bit. But yeah, so I'm just thinking about like putting a little introductory clip at the beginning of the playlist, like, hey, you're about to watch a playlist that is chronological. It starts with videos that are like 10 years old, so just bear that in mind, that you are watching the full progress from then to now. My views now do not necessarily reflect the views that I had then, etc. Just like, what's the best way through this form of media to do that? So yeah, and I'm also just, on the subject of self-criticism, I'm also just self-critical about what I do on YouTube all the time. I'm always thinking like, you know, is the fact that the videos are so long a problem? Because analytics show that a lot of people only watch 4-minute videos and then they click away. And that's why it's important that I talk about it, because then people can give me feedback and say, no, we really like the long videos. And then I'm like, okay. So I try to balance it out. I try to have shorter ones for the people who want shorter videos, and I have these longer videos. So, you know, I'm always thinking about things like, you know, do I really want to talk about this topic? Is that the best topic? Should I be talking about this topic? Am I qualified to speak on this topic? How can I approach this in the best way? You know, whatever, little types of things like that. It's just, again, assuming that I am not all powerful and all perfect, and constantly looking for ways to improve. So now going back up to a little more specifics, this is where it gets into the talking about mental health and a little bit of just mentions of anxiety, depression, and things like this. Thorn's video, Good Vibes Only, was preceded on her channel by a video about productivity and such. And in that video, she had talked about some personal issues and things like her relationship with depression. You know, I've also talked about depression and anxiety on my channel before. It's just something that comes up when you live with something every day and you have reached the point where you are comfortable sharing it with other people. And obviously we don't share every single detail, but just like sharing the fact of it with other people comes at a certain point. And so it's something I've talked about before. And in this case, in the Good Vibes Only video, Thorn was talking about how she had gotten some negative feedback about the video where she had talked about depression and other personal issues from people basically saying you shouldn't be talking about that kind of stuff. And it's crazy. It's crazy because this was not planned. I was already working on doing this video response to Thorn for a while, and then this past week I shared something on my Instagram story about anxiety and like how I personally deal with anxiety. I didn't know that I was going to be talking about the extent to which I was talking about when I started it. I just started by like telling a silly story of something that admittedly was like really trivial in my life, like just a little everyday occurrence, you know, and how that everyday occurrence triggered my anxiety because of its similarity to various patterns of things that I've had people say to me my entire life. So what I was doing and like my intention in sharing it was just like processing, because as you all know, I'm a verbal processor. I like to tell stories. So I started out just like telling a story about how this random, honestly, stupid little trivial thing in my day-to-day life came to be, and how like some comments were made and I was like, these aren't even about me, and yet I feel personally attacked. And then sharing like, and here's why I feel personally attacked, even though I know that it's not about me and my conscious mind knows that it has nothing to do with me and I'm not being attacked. But my anxiety is over here like, no, this is about you because it's exactly what everyone else has always told you, and it's just a repeating pattern. Sharing how I like take a step back and recognize like, well, I recognize that the reason this is triggering me right now is because it has to do with an ongoing pattern of things that I've experienced before, and da-da-da. And I shared a little bit of like how that manifests for me, and then coming through that recognition of what it is and what it feels like to basically saying like, I'm still going to be who I am. I know that the anxiety is not the true reality, but this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like for me to live with this and like have little things trigger you and whatever, and then you process them and you go on and you're like, all right, I'm done, cool, like I'm all set, right? So I didn't really think anything of it, and somebody messaged me being really negative, and I wasn't sure exactly what their intention was at first, so I just kind of responded politely, even though I wasn't sure. I thought they were trying to be like mean, but I wasn't sure, so I responded like kind of politely. And then their subsequent response confirmed to me that they are one of these people who has bought into the notion that we should just never talk about anything that we perceive as negative. So in this case, they were telling me that I shouldn't have ever talked about anxiety or how my anxiety makes me feel, or sharing some of the specifics of like the patterns that exist within my anxiety, because I shouldn't talk about it or write about it because that makes it happen. And it's this idea like within magic and those of us who work with energy, right? There's a real fear there if you start to tell people that simply by talking about a problem in your life, you are creating the problem. That is a surefire way to silence people, basically. And I think, again, that really what that was meant to be about was like, don't keep putting yourself down unnecessarily. Like, don't keep telling yourself, oh, I'm such a horrible person. Oh, I'm such a failure. Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. Because, quote that I don't remember the attribution of, but it is a quote. Whether you think you can or you cannot, you're right, right? It's that idea, like, don't keep putting yourself down and telling yourself you can't do these things, because then you are manifesting that in your life. The more you believe you can't do it, you won't be able to do it, right? So you have to be more positive and, no, I can do this. I can try really hard. I can rise to the challenge. No, I'm not perfect, but I can do these things, right? That's what that means. I don't think that mindset was ever meant to be applied to someone dealing with anxiety or depression or anything else in that realm, sharing what that's like for them so that other people understand how they're living, and then people telling us like, you can't talk about that because by talking about it, you are making it happen. Like, no, telling someone that they are causing their own anxiety by talking about the fact that they have anxiety is harmful. That's just harmful. That's just not the way it works. And we've actually talked about, on Pagan Perspective, someone had asked us sometime last year to talk about basically the idea of like writing down negative thoughts. Like, it was someone who was really angry at someone and they had written out their angry thoughts as though they were talking to the person. And it was just as like a therapeutic exercise, kind of like when you journal about something or, you know, whatever, where you are never intending to actually send it to that person or ever say it to the person. You are processing your own feelings in a healthier way so that you don't bottle it up and then lash out at that person the next time you see them. It's getting all of those thoughts out so that you can then approach them in a more level-headed manner. Like, that is a form of therapy and processing that many people use. And the person was asking us on Pagan Perspective what we thought about this, because their friends had all told them that they believed that by that person writing down their negative thoughts, that they had cursed the person and everyone in their coven. And I'm sorry, but that's a horrible thing to say to your friend. And it's not helpful. So the questions really that I have when people say things like that, and then now I've had it said to me directly very recently, but I've also seen it a lot just in the past. In that video on Pagan Perspective, I talked about like this is a counseling like thing. This is a thing that you do in therapy. Like, and I was recently talking to someone on Instagram through messages about this kind of thing, that like artists and musicians who channel their negative feelings into something constructive and positive, into their art. You know, like, are we saying that, you know, if you can never talk or write about it, no one should ever be writing about anxiety and depression? Nobody should ever have characters who deal with these things. Nobody should be writing music about negative things in their lives. Like, I'm sure you can all think of some examples of songs or paintings, poems, all different types of art and creativity that you like that are about something negative, but in a way that is processing it and making, you know, a beautiful piece of art out of it. And even in terms of magic, like, it just confuses me because something that a lot of us talk about is like releasing that which does not serve, and also like, oh my gosh, I don't even know, like, sorry, the idea of releasing something by saying it out loud, surrendering it to the universe, or writing it down and burning it, or whatever. Like, if we're never allowed to talk about the things, and we're never allowed to write down the things because that is creating it, then what? Like, what? I just don't understand what we're supposed to do then. So again, this is the difference between saying it's bad, I hate it, and giving actual helpful feedback. So we see a lot of people just saying, that's bad, you shouldn't do that. But then nobody can really tell us what we're supposed to do. Like, these are forms of therapy that have been used forever, which not everything that's been used forever automatically means it's great, right? Okay, just because it's been done forever doesn't mean it's right. That applies to a whole lot of things, let me tell you. I just mean that it is widely employed and helpful and is considered a healthy form of processing, as opposed to, as I said, bottling it up and then lashing out at the person when you see them. Like, if you can write it out and get your feelings out, or like talk to your best friend, talk it out, and then that's it, it's released and you feel better, and then you can go about your life in a more level manner, I think that's helpful and wonderful, and that's always been very helpful for me. And if we're telling people that they can't do that, and that talking about things is bad, we're basically telling people, like, you can never talk to your friends about the things that are bothering you. You can't see a counselor because you'd have to talk about it. Like, I just think it's very limiting and it's very harmful to talk about it in that way. And I personally will tell you, when I was dealing with this recently and thinking about this video, I was still just thinking of it in terms of like negativity, being negative versus being constructively critical, like being helpful, giving feedback kind of thing. I didn't even think of this as stigma of mental health until people who follow me on Instagram messaged me and started talking about that and said, like, yeah, if we tell people that they can't talk about their own experiences with anxiety and depression, addiction, any of these other types of things, then we are perpetuating the stigma about these topics by saying you can never talk about them, ever. Like, and it's not even like publicly, but people are saying, like, you can never speak it and you can never write it down. So again, what are we supposed to do with that? So I am firmly on team processing, in case you didn't know. I have been saying recently, talking with people, that I will try to just be a little bit more diligent about, if I know that I'm going to be mentioning these topics, I will try to tell people in the beginning, like I did in this video, just give you a little content warning, basically. Like, I'm going to be talking about these issues. I'm not really going to be going into detail a lot of the time. If I am going into detail, I always do put a content warning so that people know, like, I'm about to talk about details of abuse or manipulation or whatever, like things that I know could really trigger people because I'm giving details. But even though if I'm just talking about like this, I'm just talking about the topic of talking about anxiety and depression, I'll try to be a little more diligent about just mentioning that, because, you know, I'll do whatever I can to try to improve, but I think that we need to be able to talk about them. So if I have to tell you that I'm about to talk about it in order to talk about it, I'll do that, because we need to be able to talk about these things. And as Thorn mentioned, my last point here, like, when we're not critical about things, it allows things to go unchecked, basically. And this applies to not just this type of thing. Like, we need to talk about the fact that people are telling other people that they can't talk about things because of this good vibes only mentality and the way that it's being used by some people. I'm not just talking about that, but also going back to the idea that we can be critical of things, that we can be critical of media, we can be critical of books, movies, videos, classes, etc. Because, yeah, if we never say that there are problems with the things that are being put out there, that's how we get a bunch of people learning from resources that are really horrible resources, and they're not actually teaching them anything, but everyone's just really excited about it because it has a pretty cover, or because it talks about witchcraft, and that's cool. Like, a lot of books talk about witchcraft and actually teach you about witchcraft. So I think those are probably better than the ones that just talk about witchcraft and look pretty but don't teach you anything. Or the only things they teach you are incorrect information or passing down history that we know is not true. Like, how many books and other resources still say things are ancient that are not ancient? And, like, they're just doing it to sound more legitimate. And, like, we need to call these things out. And Thorn and I have the same problem where we still don't feel comfortable calling out the exact titles or names because it is perceived as, if we say anything negative about a resource, that we are automatically personally attacking the author or the video maker or the director of the film or whatever. That being critical of a form of media is taken as a personal attack against the person who created it, which is not necessarily what people are doing. Again, if we're just saying this person is stupid and I hate them and they suck, that's just being negative and shame on us. But if we're saying, I have a problem with the fact that this resource has not done any research, is portraying a false interpretation of history that isn't true, is passing on misinformation about the branch of witchcraft or paganism that it is supposedly educating you about, and it's just wrong and it hasn't done any research. You know, like things that are plagiarized from other things. Like, I recently read through one of the crappier resources that I've seen. And I talked about it a little bit in a previous video that I did about some problems that I'm having with resources, some new resources that are coming out. I talked about how one of them basically had like the same spell copy and pasted 10 pages later in the book. And then there was another spell copy and pasted 10 pages later in the book. And they just gave it a different name and changed one ingredient. And every other word was literally just the entire page was copy and pasted. And it's like, why? Why would you spend money on a book like that that's not really teaching you anything and is just plagiarizing itself, let alone other books, when you have other people putting in a lot of work to do like a really good job at a really good, helpful resource? And like, so we need to promote those ones. So yeah, like we're just out here promoting the things that we think are helpful, but kind of afraid to criticize anything that we think of as really unhelpful because we are in a current environment where doing that will just make people hate us personally because it comes across in this like skewed good vibes only environment as we are attacking that author or we are attacking that video creator, and because so-and-so loves that video creator or author and we are criticizing their work and we hate them, therefore so-and-so now hates us and we are a horrible person, and like we don't want that. So we need to start the conversation this way by basically saying, like, there is a difference between being critical of something, being helpful with criticism, and just being negative. And there is a difference between sharing our personal experiences and struggles with things that are perceived as negative or that maybe are objectively negative, depending on what the thing is. We need to be able to talk about those things in order to improve ourselves and improve the world. So like, we need to be able to talk about anxiety. We need to be able to talk about depression. We need to be able to talk about addiction. We need to be able to talk about racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia. We need to be able to talk about general bigotry, which is generally the term that I end up using because there's so many different negative individual things that we all deal with on a daily basis, or if we don't deal with them on a daily basis, then we are privileged, and we need to be able to talk about that privilege, and we need to be able to talk about intersectionality without people calling us names or writing us off or saying, oh, let's just not talk about that because that's negative and I want good vibes only. Because to me, talking about negative things such as racism, talking about issues that we have in our community with racism or with sexism or with transphobia, talking about those things has a positive end. Talking about that stuff is positive to me because we are trying to bring issues to light and talk about how to solve them and improve the community and improve ourselves and improve the world for everyone. Being negative would be sitting over here being the person who is racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, like just hating people because of who they are. That's the negative part. The people who are wanting to talk about these issues to improve them and like help solve them, we are not the ones being negative. We're talking about a negative thing that exists in the world already. We are not creating the negative thing by talking about how to fight it. And I've just kind of gotten tired of hearing people say that, basically, like, oh, well, you're the one talking about this, so you're being negative and you're creating this problem. No. Are we part of the society that has created the problem? Yes. Are we all still living in the society that benefits from the way that systems are in place and these problems? Yes. And we need to talk about that in order to help solve it and improve things and have a positive end. So those are my various thoughts. Yeah. So takeaways, criticism versus negativity, there's a difference. We shouldn't be critical of people for sharing their struggles and helping us understand what they're dealing with and telling them that they should never talk or write about it is not helpful. That is silencing them. And as many people have pointed out to me, it is perpetuating the stigma against mental health. Let's not do that. You can be critical in a helpful way of things, products, media, information, without having to be just being mean and personally attacking the people providing the information, because sometimes people just don't know yet, and that's why we're trying to help by educating. Which sometimes, one more note, all right, it's already a long video, so one more note. Sometimes that blows up in our face, and maybe I'll do a separate video about this because I think I have a lot to say about this as well. But people who try to educate other people and say, like, actually that information that you're sharing is incorrect, that's false, that's been disproven, that's not what really happened, that's not what that word means, you know, whatever. Sometimes we are met with thanks, like, oh my gosh, thank you so much, thanks for sharing that information and helping me learn, yay. But sometimes it blows up in our face and people just, again, read us as being haters and just being negative. So instead of realizing that we're trying to help people learn, some people just get mad at us for saying it and refuse to listen and then just continue to perpetuate misinformation, which is harmful. Like, I know teachers who have told me that their students who have come to them for help learning about paganism, witchcraft, magic, all these things, students are coming in with false conceptions from learning it from crappy books or social media resources who actually don't know anything yet and don't really have any business teaching, but are doing it anyway, which is already another subject of another video I'm going to be doing. Students are coming to teachers with all of these false notions, and then when the teacher tries to correct the misconceptions and the misinformation, some of the students are saying to the teachers, you're wrong. I think you're wrong. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And it's like, all right, well, that's your responsibility as a student at that point, because the teacher tried to teach you and you refused to learn, and that's fine. Like, we can't really do much about that except try to educate people and encourage people to keep learning. And like, yeah, if someone's just being mean to you, then they're just being mean to you and they're kind of being an asshole. But if someone's honestly like trying to help you learn and they're doing it in not a nasty way, maybe they're just trying to help you learn, you know? Like, we try. We really try. We can be constructively critical of things. We can also be self-critical in a constructive way. And when we are not critical, things tend to go unchecked. And that's how we get people and resources who are really not great and really not helpful, giving everyone and everything else a bad name, pretty much. So, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time, and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.